was these factors which moulded the conservative and cautious side to Henry's character, so that he tended to retain rather than to innovate in his methods of rule and administration. Yet Henry's reign coincided with the high renaissance of Michelangelo, Raphael and Da Vinci in Italy, with the voyages of discovery of Columbus and Vespucci, and with the spread of the new learning throughout Europe. Henry's court became a centre of culture and great splendour, a hope for the future which was never properly fulfilled by his successor. This curious dichotomy in Henry's life and reign is perhaps best expressed by his chapel in Westminster Abbey, where Henry and his queen lie in a splendid Renaissance tomb carved by Michelangelo's fellow student Torrigiano, surrounded by the last flourishing of pure Gothic architecture. So there are 16 pages of colour plates and 100 illustrations in black and white. So look at this marvellous illustration. So let's see. Now this painting on the front, according to this, is Michael Sitto's portrait of Henry VII, painted in 1505, the National Portrait Gallery, and on the back is the initial letter of the preface to Imagination, de Fray Noblesse, showing a copy of the book being presented to Henry VII. That's at the British Museum. So this one. Now, so this image here shows a map of the globe. There's the UK and Ireland, Africa, Europe, and let's see, it says Ptolemy and Amerigo Vespucci from Martin Waldseemüller's Map of the World. Here he is again. So we have a contents page, we have an introduction, then Lancastrian heritage, the founding of the dynasty, diplomacy and sedition, king and court, winds of change, town and country, royal power and administration, and the widower. So, 1973 is the date of publication. So we have an introduction by Antonia Fraser, but we're going to go straight to the first chapter, which is Lancastrian heritage, 1457 to 85. Okay. The Battle of Bosworth Field, fought on the 22nd of August of 1485, seemed to many Englishmen, despite Richard III's death in action, no more than another engagement in the episodic campaigns between Yorkist and Lancastrian factions that had plagued England since the end of the 100 Years' War, and had seen the crown change hands 5 times. The victory, regarded by posterity as decisive, could so easily have been reversed. horizons expanding in so many directions, Henry was still in outlook a medieval king, and yet he was so successful in his dynastic ambitions that the crown of England has remained ever since in the line of his heirs. Henry Tudor was born at Pembroke Castle, which is here, on the 28th of January 1457, the only son of Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, and the Lady Margaret Beaufort. He was not born into the purple in a royal palace. His arrival in the world was not heralded by national rejoicing, nor was he a child aware from a tender age that he was different in kind and degree from other boys, because he was destined for a crown. The circumstances of his birth were unpropitious, for he was very much the child of civil war. His mother, still under 14 years old, had been a widow for 12 weeks, for Edmund Tudor, sent to take control of South Wales, had been captured by Yorkists the previous summer and imprisoned in Carmarthen Castle, where he died in November, aged about 26. In her adversity, the Lady Margaret was comforted by her strong religious convictions, to which she held firmly throughout her life, and was protected by her brother-in-law, Jasper Tudor, Earl of Pembroke, who brought her to his castle. When John Leland visited Pembroke towards the end of Henry VIII's reign, he noted, "The castle standeth hard by the wall on a hard rock, and is very large and strong, being double warded. In the outer ward I saw the chamber where Henry VII was born, in knowledge whereof a chimney is now made, with the arms and badges of the king." A few years before this visit, Edmund Tudor's remains had been removed by royal command of his grandson from the Grey Friars in Carmarthen to a place of honour in St. David's Cathedral. Henry's paternal grandfather, Owen Tudor of Anglesey, Stock, had entered the household of Henry V as a page, until service at Agincourt earned him early promotion to the ranks of the squires of the body to the king. Welsh medieval genealogy is fraught with pitfalls, but in the case of the Tudor family, the lineage is unusually difficult to disentangle. Henry VII, proud of his Welsh ancestry, had prepared by a herald, an abbot, and a Welsh-speaking canon, a pedigree which enthusiastically linked him not only with such princes as Cadwallader the Great, who died in 1172, but even with such mythical figures as Trojan Brutus, a putative ruler of Dark Age Britain. The most that can be said with certainty is that an ancestor, Ednyfed Vaughan, was a competent administrator in the service of Llewellyn the Great in the early 13th century. After Henry V's death, Owen Tudor stayed on at court. The young Queen Dowager Catherine of Valois appointed him clerk of her wardrobe, and they soon fell in love. The secret of their marriage, probably in 1425, was so well kept that it was perhaps not until the birth of their fifth child at Hatfield that the King's Council, frightened at the political effects of scandal, forced them to separate. Queen Catherine retired to Bermondsey Abbey, where she died the following year, while her young sons were initially placed in the care of the Abbess of Barking. Owen took sanctuary at Westminster, but surrendered on promise of a safe conduct to Wales. However, Catherine de Valois. Edmund and Jasper, noted here, Owen and Catherine, who both entered religious orders, and Jakira, who married Reynold, Lord Grey of Wilton. With the outbreak of civil war, they showed themselves faithful. Lancastrians. Owen was taken prisoner at Mortimer's Cross in 1461, and on Edward IV's orders was beheaded in Hereford Market-place, saying as he went before his executioner, "That head shall lie on the stock that was wont to lie on Queen Catherine's lap." A mad woman combed the hair and washed the face of the severed head, set on the market cross. Owen's son Jasper escaped from the battlefield to rejoin Queen Margaret of Anjou. Edmund Tudor, the eldest of Owen's 3 sons, had been created Earl of Richmond in 1452 and formally declared legitimate by Parliament. The next year Jasper was created Earl of Pembroke. He was to play a leading part in Henry's life before the overthrow of Richard III. War and exile had left him a bachelor until, in his mid-50s, he married a widow. His only child was an illegitimate daughter, Helen, who became the mother of Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, destined to preach Henry VIII's funeral oration. The third brother, Owen, like his father, outlived his generation by steering clear of politics, for he had become a monk at Westminster Abbey, and when he died in 1502, Henry VII paid for his funeral. Okay, so I'm just going to look back slightly to this picture that we passed. So this is the family of Henry VII with St. George and the Dragon. In the background stands 2 fantastic buildings, with St. George slaying the dragon to protect Princess Cleo Doline. In the foreground below, canopies decorated with the badges of the Tudors kneel Henry VII and his Queen Elizabeth of York, with their 7 children. The painting, in its original version, is thought to have been an altarpiece at the Royal Palace of Sheen, and could well have been painted for a tournament held there in 1492, when Garter arms were granted to various knights, hence the allusion to St. George. And then here opposite we have the ancestry of Henry VI. On the left are ranged his Valois predecessors, and on the right his Plantagenet ancestors. The figures at the foot of the page are on the left. Here, I guess, Richard, Duke of York, Regent of England, and the father of Edward IV and Richard III, and on the right, Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, Regent, and Henry VI, uncle. Henry's mother was one of the most remarkable women of the century. A blue-stocking, devout, yet thrice married, not counting her months as a child bride to Suffolk's son. She was ambitious for her only child, for whom she was parted for all but a few of his first 28 years. Yet Lady Margaret remained incredibly discreet in these difficult times, almost to the point of disinterestedness. She had a flair for fading into the background, turning her everyday life into a holy retreat. She was of almost royal lineage. Her great-grandfather was John of Gaunt, who, after his second wife's death, had made an honest woman of his mistress. Catherine Swineford, sister-in-law to the poet Chaucer. Their brood of children were named Beauforts after the Beaufort castle in France, in which at least one of them had been born. Though born on the wrong side of the blanket, they had been legitimised by Parliament. The eldest son, John, was created Earl of Somerset by Richard II, and his brother Henry became a cardinal. Somerset's second son, another John Beaufort, who had succeeded as the third Earl on his elder brother's premature death in 1418, died in 1444, leaving a daughter, Margaret, aged 3. When she was 9 years old, she was brought to court during the heyday of her guardian, William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, the effective ruler of the realm, who affianced her to his son. Later, when the Duke fell from power, men accused him of aiming at bringing the boy nearer the throne through this alliance, even though King Henry IV had decreed that none of his Beaufort cousins could succeed, but Suffolk had found a wealthier heiress for his son, and Henry VI was anxious to arrange a marriage between Margaret and his half-brother, Edmund Tudor. Tradition has it that the girl was much confused about her future spouse, but that as a result of a vision she became convinced that she should wed Richmond. Their marriage, as we have seen, was tragically brief. At 13 she was a widow, great with child and pinning her hopes on a son. After her son's triumphs, Margaret wrote to him on his birthday, ending her letter in 1501. This day of St. Agnes, that I did bring into this world my good and gracious prince, king and only beloved son, with her memories of Pembroke Castle and the tribulations which followed. By then a great lady, far above the political fray, she was more than satisfied with Henry's discharge of his duties. To the end he respected her, not merely as his mother, or as a most cultivated and devout lady, but as the heiress of the House of Lancaster, through whom his imperfect title to the throne of England derived. Now, in this picture up here, we have John Beaufort, first Earl of Somerset, Margaret Beaufort's grandfather and son of John of Gaunt by Catherine Swineford. He is depicted, I think this is him, he is depicted kneeling before a scene of the Annunciation from the early 15th century Beaufort Book of Hours. After Edward IV seized the crown in 1461, Pembroke Castle, where Margaret and her child had been living with Jasper Tudor, fell to the Yorkists, and they were placed under the guardianship of William Herbert. Since Herbert was also granted Pembroke Castle and Jasper's earldom of Pembroke, the boy did not need to change his residence, though separated from his mother, who by now had married the Lancastrian Sir Henry Stafford. The boy found in Herbert an admirable substitute for his father. His schooling was taken seriously, and he was brought up as a prospective husband for Herbert's daughter Maud. When he was 12, however, Henry's world collapsed around him. people's imagination of the old romances associated with the legendary Arthur. His knowledge of French was a good deal better than his command of English, and what he read of the Breton versions of the Arthurian cycle fitted in with what he had been told of the fiery prognostications of the Welsh bards. Shrewdly he vowed to name his firstborn legitimate son Arthur. There was one legacy of the years of exile, for Henry became enamoured of a Breton girl who bore him a son named Roland de Belleville. Eventually the lad came to England and was knighted by his father on the field of battle at Blackheath in 1497. Roland was soon afterwards appointed constable of Beaumaris Castle, where he lived until his death in 1527. Thus a Tudor returned to Anglesey, from which the family had sprung. There was never a hint that Roland, like Charles II's Monmouth, might prove a political embarrassment. He married a Welsh girl, and their granddaughter, Catherine of Boraine, proudly acknowledged her cousinage to Elizabeth I. The revulsion of so many of the Yorkist nobility at Richard III's usurpation of the throne in June 1483 made them weigh carefully the rival claims of the young Earl of Richmond. Rumours of the murder of the princes in the Tower had indeed brought Henry nearer to the throne. Moreover, in April 1484, 2 months after Richard's son Edward had been declared heir apparent, the 11-year-old boy died at Middleham, removing yet another obstacle. At first, Richard contemplated naming as his heir Edward, Earl of Warwick, his brother Clarence's son, but in the end he preferred another nephew, John de la Pole, Earl of Lincoln, who was now granted the reversion of the estates of Lady Margaret Beaufort. For the present, all was playing into Henry Tudor's hands. Although once he became king, he was to be plagued by Warwick and his impersonators and by Lincoln, while the adherents of the White Rose of England would continue to intrigue long into his son's